This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Care Notes with Doug Wilber. And Care Notes is part of Cherished Companions. And, Doug, from what I know about your model, and we've talked about this many, many times, your model is a little bit different. You have full-time employees who do the care. And a lot of the agencies that I've talked to and dealt with in the past, they contract people. So what's the difference? Can you give me some information there?
Sure. When I was starting the company, one of the things that I had weighed out is like, should I do like this contract model? And matter of fact, some consultants had said, do this, and basically the reason is you don't have to do payroll taxes. You don't have to do, all of you don't have to pay the unemployment insurance or workers' comp or all those things that are a part of a cost of doing business when you have employees, overtime, things of that nature.
Sure.
So when I started the company, I'd weighed out that as an option. And believe me, when you do something like that, you save a tremendous amount of money by going that direction as a company. So it actually makes things really super clean and easy as far as from a business thing, because you're not having all this overhead that
Sure.
led to supporting that. But as I thought through it, I thought, no, I don't believe that's the right thing to do. In many respects. Number one, you're running this and as far as like the way I'm running it, you cannot do what we're doing, I don't believe, without having a level of control over the individuals, as where someone's going and other things. So it's not really honest, in my view.
Sure.
It's not the right thing for the clients, because where does liability go with those situations? Who is then responsible for things if, say, someone got hurt? If you're not covering workers' comp or doing things like that, then who's actually would have to pay for that, and who's responsible? And so whether it looked and then there's some of those issues are having to do with the client specifically, but then
Sure.
in the who's responsible in that situation, and how do you protect your employees? Who's paying Social Security? If you as a company are not, then that employee is responsible, and if they're not paying it, is the family, responsible for it. And then let's say they don't do it, they're not building up their Social Security. They're not, doing things that will lend to their future being right. And
Right.
so I even find people who've done, private caregiving for many years, and they don't have enough hours to be able to qualify for Social Security. And you think that's not a good life for this person. This person is bound to work the rest of their life because they did not get enough money
Right.
into the Social Security program to be able to qualify. And so in my view, it became a relatively easy, hard decision. It was hard because it was hard, on my part, because we'd have to cover all those things. It was easy because, as so many things, when you know what the right thing is to do, you do the right thing.
Exactly.
And so, that was, I made that decision, and we've been that model from the very beginning. And it has made our costs significantly higher than that. And so yeah, but again, it was the right thing for the client. It was the right thing for the caregiver. And I think ultimately for us as a company, it
Sure.
was the right thing because, it's always right when you do right. And
Exactly.
um, so, so that, but many companies opt for that because um, because of the expense and complications that are involved in that. And but they're not, I don't believe, doing the right thing
It-
for all the parties involved in that situation.
Well,
So,
and the nice thing for the employee, they have your support as well, because they
right,
don't have this paid employee. So you're going to help find them those assignments, but you're also going to connect them with the assignments that they fit. Whereas what I've seen from contracting, and even contracting on the IT side, okay, I've contracted where I've gotten paid directly, and they're very specific. They know what my skills are, they know what I can do, and they're there to support me. I've also
right,
contracted where they've said, hey, here's an assignment, you can just go out and do it. Half the time I don't even know what I'm doing and I'm the wrong fit. And now I'm embarrassed in front of the customer. So
yeah, yeah, no, um, yeah, when you kind of own all the components and the responsibility, it makes it pretty clear, that the what that you want to do the right thing in all those situations and get it right from the beginning.
right.
And even when you do everything you possibly can to get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, but it's not for lack of trying.
Exactly.
You want it to be right from the beginning, and so it is a higher incentive. Whereas, as you mentioned, or kind of implied at least, the incentive isn't necessarily there for when you have the contractors, in that situation. Now, one of the things that I do believe also is a lot of people say, well, that's having to do with other companies and how they do things.
Sure.
Um, but also, there's another situation that is there's a family that will say, why don't I just hire someone? I can save the money and just pay someone to come to my house, kind of like a glorified babysitter, and
Right.
I'll get, a worker to come in and do this. Well, what they don't understand is they generally pretty clearly become the employer. So they are responsible for payroll taxes. They are responsible for um, for making sure that that Social Security is taken out. They are responsible for workers' comp, and very few are actually doing that. And to save a few dollars, they say, "Why don't I just do X?" And just hire the person on my own, and probably 99% of the time it's fine. But boy, when it goes south for them, it can really go south. It can really be a problem because ultimately they really are responsible in all but the most extreme of cases. They just
Right.
don't know that they're responsible, and they're thinking it's like the babysitter, and it really isn't just like the babysitter. And sometimes people have found out the hard way.
Exactly.
Because those things, if you're setting schedules, if you're doing a lot of those things, um, you really are ultimately the one that is responsible. So what happens if someone were to fall and hurt themselves, or have a big issue? Well, you potentially have a big problem on your hand. And that's not good. Believe me, you have enough. The reason that you're hiring someone is because you have problems.
Don't need any extra.
You don't need
Exactly.
more problems,
Well, this reminds me, there was a caregiver that came through the agency where my mother was that was taking care of her, but she kept offering to come at different times of the day, supposedly on her own. And in the beginning, I just thought she was being nice. And I would say, well, if you want to, you can come this evening, whatever. And the management finally said to me, unless she's coming to visit you specifically, we don't want her here. And it dawned on me, oh, that's right, because she's on your payroll. So
Right. Oh, yeah.
even though she's not on the time clock, she's on your payroll, she's on your premises. And so I had to tell this woman, I'm sorry, we can't do this anymore. And she was very upset because she had thought that I would give her extra things, like I would pack up food for her to take home and things like that. And it was like,
Right.
that wasn't the deal. And, I didn't need her there for that. But so people have to be careful when somebody thinks that they're doing them a favor. Sometimes the favor is not kosher.
Yeah. One of the reasons you hire a company is because then that person is the middle. And you might say, well, I don't want someone in the middle. That just adds extra cost. Well, it adds value too. There are situations, and that's a perfect example, the where a caregiver and we have very specific rules for our caregivers of things that they are not allowed to do. They can't work for someone on the side. They can't just visit when it's not their shift. And it's to prevent abuse situations is really what ultimately it is. If you hire someone that is not tied in with an organization where there is supervisory control, you're setting yourself up to someone who can try to take advantage and that would try to kind of manipulate the situation. And manipulation happens a lot with the elderly. I actually was just talking to someone, and when I was talking to them, I said um, that I was kind of covering this whole idea that there are people that are very unscrupulous and they tend to gravitate to jobs and positions where they can do things that aren't right. And you find this with the elderly. You find it in different fields, but you find it with the elderly or those who are infirm one way or another, where the person is a manipulator and they will get in and they will try to do certain things to manipulate an end
Right.
result that they're wanting. I mean, and and that's why you'll hear about those abuse situations that are occurring. Not too long ago in a county that is right next to the counties that we're working in, there was a person, I don't know if you've heard about this, but it was there was a caregiver, and these caregivers, at least one of them, I believe, and I think maybe two of them were living with the person. So they were, but it wasn't a live-in like what we have.
Right.
It was this situation where they were living there. Well, the man died, and so they actually took the dead body and they put it in the car and propped it up, and they went in to a drive-through for a bank and made him look like he was alive,
To
and
get
they
his
were
money.
to get his
Oh
money.
my
So
God.
we withdrew the money. They took the money. Then they took the body and they basically took it to the hospital and just left the body there at the hospital, for to be taken care of, at that point in time. But it was on so many levels, it was so dumb, but and so awful and horrible and stuff. But it was a perfect example of someone that had kind of insinuated themselves into
Right.
a situation and ended up, kind of doing the ultimate and taking advantage of someone or a situation. But it's, you kind of think, well, what type of person would do that? Yes, what type of person would do that? That is why you need a middle person.
Oh, absolutely. And you and I
Yeah,
have talked about the fact that even some of the agencies that I had used for my mother, um, as good as they were, sometimes there were little mistakes that came about. And I was lucky. I was there. I was observing, but at least they weren't terrible mistakes like that. Okay. Um,
right.
and so I would only feel confident going through a company such as yours. And what I like about the fact that they're full-time people, and that's why I liked where my mother lived, because those care workers were full-time. Okay. They knew what their hours were. They knew, when they were going to come, when they were going to go. And so did we. And I also didn't have to work on scheduling because if I needed somebody 24/7, that's a lot of scheduling. And I don't know how you guys do it. And I praise you when you have multiple families that are in need.
Well, and that, every once in a while, and again, this is that once in a while happened today. So we had someone said, well, we want to use private, but will you guys just fit in and help us with that person can't make it? And so we said, well, we'll try to help individuals in a situation, but the fact is that um, we're not going to guarantee anything that we're
Right.
going to be able to do it. It's, and not that we can even ultimately guarantee everything, for it, but I will tell you that we move heaven and earth trying to, if like we have a call off, for one of our employees and it's regular hours, we're going to move heaven and earth to try to get a sub in
Right.
for that in that situation. Um, because we feel a sense of responsibility in that situation. Ultimately, the family's, you know, has the ultimate responsibility, but we feel a responsibility and an obligation to do what we can, and so we will work tirelessly to do it. And there have been times where I personally have gone over and done care because the person needed care,
Right.
and so that's it's not beneath anyone in our organization to help an individual when there's a need and or in a situation like this a call off. But you can't just like say, well, I'm going to hire my private and then have some organization come in and be your backup
Yeah.
in that situation. And that's the problem is that with hiring, and you were kind of bringing, when you are doing your own hiring and you're doing the schedule, what happens when you have a call off? Well, if you've exhausted your group of individuals, what are you going to do at that point?
Exactly.
We have 200 employees, so we can draw from a pretty deep bench in that situation. When you're doing it on your own, you don't have a very deep bench, and heaven forbid if you have a couple people quit at the same time, and that does happen.
Exactly.
where you'll have, um, who knows, the grass is greener or whatever, and all of a sudden you don't have, your workers in place, and who's going to have to go and do that? Well, it's going to end up being the family, possibly for a lot of shifts, and for oftentimes things that you don't feel very qualified to do.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
and thinking about it, there are so many of us that are, I won't say we're elderly, but we're older taking care of our elderly parents. And we may not physically be able to do that. My niece was up north taking care of her biological dad, who she just reunited with about 7 years ago.
Hmm.
And he was in the last stages of life. Now she has MS, and so she's got limitations, but she was there as an extra set of ears and arms to do the best that she could. But
Wow.
as we all said, luckily, his wife was there, who also is elderly, but between the two of them, they could care for him.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but you got to think about those things because right now I have a bad right shoulder. If I had to move somebody or lift them, I'd be in bed next to them right now. So,
Right. Well, and you're actually bringing a good point, which is, in the past, when you were like with care, people were dying, I mean, the life expectancy, you know, a lot of, I mean, there's a reason why 65 was a retirement age. At the time that they did that, they thought that people might live a year or two first and collect from Social
right,
Security. So it was based on kind of, certain thoughts as far as that. And obviously life expectancy has gone way up where, we care for people that are in their hundreds.
right,
We, have quite a few people that over the years that we care for, and many in their 90s, and definitely many in the 80s. Well, 80s in the past, not that it was, you know, completely exceptional, but you didn't have the large group that make it into their 80s
right,
like we do now. And so if someone's in their 80s or 90s, um, think about, let's say there's a 20 or 25-year difference. That means that, as you were mentioning, the kids can easily be elderly
right.
themselves,
Exactly. Exactly.
um, and maybe not elderly in the sense of being, crippled or feeble, but enough that it's not easy to do.
No,
And I hate to say this, but the generation that is coming up is not in as good a shape as the parents were. There are many chronic illnesses I'm seeing for people in their that are in their 70s now that weren't quite as apparent to me, at least to me, my experience. For this generation that was before,
right.
and I just think that generation before was a little bit leaner and meaner, as far as like from a health standpoint.
Sure.
They had the medicines that extended their life in a really good way. Um, but they tended to be thinner all their life than I think the group behind. And so I think they have a little bit less, or had a little bit less, and are having a little less chronic illnesses, So, but we're seeing a little bit more, I think, in the baby boom generation, and I can't even imagine what the generations that follow that are going to be like, because they are not in very good shape, So, so, and this is getting back to the issue, for a couple bucks, as far as difference, and I'm not minimizing. I know people are in fixed incomes and there's things are tight, but many times people do have the funds for that. Is it worth, the aggravation, the potential liabilities that are involved in things to hire a company that is well run and trying to be, prudent in doing what they need to do,
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
and even things like, doing, for heaven's sake, a background check. So many people have someone come in their house that, they hire, and they don't have a background check, and they have no idea who these folks are that are coming in. At least, a legitimate company that hires someone as employees, are doing background
Right.
checks,
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
in our case, I was mentioning to someone today, I said, what the X factor right now is drugs. We have a huge drug epidemic, um, in our society. And I don't mean this in any way a condescending way, but people who are hooked on drugs are really good liars. Okay, that's because the drug becomes a preeminent thing
Right.
in their lives, and they need to get those drugs. And and that's one of the reasons why we do random drug screens, is because we want to have a situation where we can potentially uncover a problem before it happens. And when it's random, they don't know when they're going to be picked.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, um, you know, so what we're hoping, honestly, is that someone will say, "Oh, they do random drug screens. We don't want to work for that company."
Exactly. Exactly.
We'll work for the company that doesn't do the random drug screens, or better yet, we'll just try to, you know, privately thing where there's no one looking over our shoulders that will end up, doing.
It's funny because I do IT work at university hospitals monthly, and I have to go for random drug screens. And the first time didn't bother me. Second time when they told me, it was almost like 3 weeks later. I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because you're going into the hospital.
Yeah,
You may not be dealing with individuals, but you're in the hospital setting." And it was like, "Oh, I get it," you know.
yeah,
And I've been tagged more than any other individual that I could even imagine, and they don't understand why, but it's like, it's not a big deal. I have nothing to hide. I'll go ahead and do this. But I
right.
That's it really important because I do know that you're right. I have a friend who won't work for anybody because of just that. And she claims
Yeah,
she doesn't take drugs, but why would you not take a drug test if you weren't taking them? So,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, and frankly, that is, that's exactly that self-selection that, we hope for, that someone will say, "I don't want to work for this company,"
yeah,
for that reason. And I think it's worked. I think it's, made a difference. And, one of the things in general, when you check, when you supervise, when you're overviewing, people, or there's some oversight, not review. I think that it really does prevent a lot of problems. And so people who, you made a statement, I think, that was good, which is, "I have nothing to hide, so I don't really care."
yeah,
Um, the people who have something to hide are going to gravitate where they're less likely to, um, to be found,
right, yep,
or what they're trying to hide is. So if someone has something to hide, they are going, and they're doing something that is untoward. They are not wanting someone that is going to look over their shoulder, that
right,
is going to supervise, that is going to test. that is going to reprimand. If, so for example, we had, had a situation not too long ago, and it happens to all of us, where someone was a no call, no show, and that's, it's not tolerable in that situation. And so let's just say that person is no longer employed with us, and that's what you would want. You want
Exactly.
to have it so that, and it doesn't, but you have to have supervisory things in order for something like that to happen. You have to have someone that is actually looking and that is actually caring, and that, where it's, and we have all sorts of little things that we do. For example, someone has to clock in and clock out when they're at, um, our clients, so we know that they're on the premises. The way we do it is, they have a app on their phone, and
Right.
geofence to the property. We
Yeah.
know they're there, or we know that and we know that what time they arrived, and we know what time they're leaving. Um, that's a good thing. And so when someone says, well, why pay the extra? Well, it's those things and those reasons that you pay, an extra amount of money. And in the end, it really is, I believe, truly worthwhile, and,
Absolutely.
to do that. So anyway, some thoughts. A lot of times I'll talk about things in this when I have a question, or when I've recently had a conversation, or I've seen a situation that you say, oh, this is something that's worth talking about.
Absolutely. And
So
we're grateful that Cherished Companions exists, and that I'm sure there are other organizations out there that are as good as yours, but we are only talking about Cherished Companions today. So have a good day.
all right, thanks.
Here
Take
now.
care.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.